Second. All right, so we are officially live. It's myself, Michael Rubloff, with Janusz, otherwise known as Mr. Nerf, and our guest this week is Martin Nebelong, who is a very well-renowned Danish artist. And so we've actually crossed paths a few times over the last year or so, where things were very, very different. I was just taking a look at an interview that we did last June, where Luma had just released their Unreal Engine plugin, and we will get into that in just a little bit. But Martin is one of the preeminent, I guess you'd call, digital artists in the world. So we're really thankful to have you on the show today.
Yeah, perfect. Also, very grateful that we have you on the show. I had the pleasure to work a couple of months with you together at Hydra, and it was just a joy because you can just take every working state of a tool and just pull out miracles. I'm always fascinated how good you are doing this stuff, and also even if this is like new tech, you just take it and make also great art. So I'm pretty happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. What an introduction. I feel a little humbled, I guess, but it's great to see both of you. And I've as you say, Michael, we've had the pleasure of speaking previously in another time. It almost feels like. And Janusz, a pleasure to see you again. And as you say, we've had the pleasure of working together on some very exciting things. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and talking a little bit about some of my explorations of this technology.
Yeah, so definitely, within the last year, the technology has exploded. But I kind of want to go back a little bit to the beginning of your, I guess you call it, like digital explorations, and kind of what those early influences were that have shaped this path of yours.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'm 41 years old now. Have 3 kids and a wife, and I, sometimes the early inspirations and what led me to where I am today feels like a totally different life, because there's been so many life changes, experiences, but also on the professional front, my 21 years as a professional artist now has there's been so many different turns and path changes. And I would say, the early days, I was born in the 80s, so my early influences was Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, all the usual stuff, seeing my friends play Mario on their Nintendo systems. I never got one myself. So instead of playing Nintendo, I would waste, I guess, my time drawing. Not a waste, of course. I'm glad I did. I started early out with doing artwork, and I've been doing so ever since. And I remember specifically wanting to do comic books as a child, because I grew up with all the usual European comics like Tintin and Lucky Luke and all the classics. And I looked at the drawings there and I was like, that's incredible. I basically want to be able to do that. I want to be able to tell stories through worlds that I create using my imagination and the tools at my disposal. And I would say I've been pursuing that dream ever since, like the idea of being able to take the images I have in my mind and sharing them with the world, no matter what the tools are. And that's been driving me ever since. So that's also led me to explore things like generative AI, which has been, for a lot of people, a very controversial choice, because, as I just said, I grew up as a traditional artist doing drawing, painting, then later on the virtual painting or sculpting in VR, drawing in Photoshop, all sorts of things. So for some people, the fact that I even dare to explore generative AI is very provocative. I guess for obvious reasons, because as you know, there's a lot of controversies surrounding generative AI and the way these systems are often trained. So I understand the reasons, but I guess we'll talk a little bit more about that later, I imagine. But early inspiration is definitely reading a lot of comic books, going to the library, coming home with stacks of those books and seeing what was possible with a pen and paper.
What were your first steps into digital art? So how did you start out? Did you use Photoshop, or did you already have like a board where you could draw on? Or
I remember getting a Wacom board when I was around 13 years old. I think I got my first Wacom drawing tablet. And it just felt like magic. And, at that time, you didn't have YouTube. You didn't have any like easily accessible resources about how to do these things. So a lot of it was done on my own exploration, and luckily back then I had a friend whose dad was working at an advertising agency, so he knew about Photoshop, and I got a copy back then and started using the tools in an early stage. And back then Photoshop was quite a different experience. You didn't have all the advanced brush settings and all of the things you'd get later on, but still it felt like an entirely new world of possibility. I was able to do so much more than just with pen and paper. So that started me out on a long journey of digital art at around age 13, I think.
And it sounds like a major stepping point too in your career has been like the introduction of dreams. And so I was kind of curious to get your take on like how that helped you translate these ideas that you either had in your head or these larger visions that you wanted to create, and translating them into some kind of actual tangible representation.
Yeah, so dreams is I guess you're referring to Media Molecule dreams and not my own dreams, right?
Yeah, not the Dream Machine either.
No, not Luma Dream or any of the other dream system out there. No, so dreams has a very special place in my creative journey for sure. And I guess for a lot of listeners or viewers, dreams is entirely unknown. So a lot of the strangest thing is that a lot of people don't know about dreams at all. And in my opinion, dreams is the most amazing piece of software. It's a game engine running on a PlayStation 4 or 5. And it basically allows you to create all the assets for your games or your film or your artwork directly on the PlayStation using Move controllers. So I actually have them lying right next to me here on the table. I always have them nearby. And then using these, I was able to, I could draw brush strokes, I could sculpt in full 3D. Instead of using a mouse on a flat surface, I was able to reach in and shape reality almost using these two things. And prior to working with dreams, and I started using dreams back in, 2019 or something, I think. But prior to that, I was sculpting in VR for 2 years or so, being one of the first in the world to start using these tools on a daily basis in my professional work. And I would take on the VR headset. I would be fully immersed in what I was working on and sculpting in the same way that I would later do in dreams. But weirdly enough, the thing I loved most about dreams is actually the fact that wearing a VR headset isn't mandatory. So I can, if I want to, I can take on the PlayStation VR headset and be fully immersed in the work that I'm doing. But at any point, I can take that headset off and keep working with exactly the same tools, still using the VR controls. And to me, it's such a mystery why we don't have that kind of input controls for normal 3D workflows. Why don't you have controls like that in Blender or Maya? Or to me, it's just much more natural. Try sculpting a tree with a mouse, for instance. It's a very time-consuming process of turning the camera, making a brush stroke, manipulating vertices. Where in dreams, all I would do when I was drawing a branch was, this motion in 3D space. So I'm hoping we'll see tools like that at some point that don't force you to wear the VR headset, basically. And I actually, Adobe has a tool called Adobe Substance 3D Modeler, which is a VR sculpting tool, but they also have something called headless mode, which sounds very frightening. But actually what it means is you can take off the VR headset and place it in front of you on the table a Quest 3 headset, for instance, and then it uses the camera tracking from the headset without you wearing it, so you can still use the VR sculpting tools, which is awesome, I think. So that's a little bit of what I had in Dreams. But anyways, Dreams, amazing tool. I spent like 5 years, I think, of my life doing all of my artwork basically in Dreams, both my own personal artwork, but also artwork for a wide variety of clients, and the main client, of course, being Media Molecule themselves, whom I worked with for something like 4 years on a part-time basis as a freelancer. And working with the team at Media Molecule was an amazing experience. A lot of the people there are pure geniuses, I would say. One of my biggest idols, of course, being the art director Kareem Eterney, a big inspiration of mine. And then Alex Evans, which I'm sure Alex Evans is familiar to some of those of you interested in NERF and Gaussian splatting, because he's quite a well-known figure in that area of research. And Alex Evans used to, he basically made the Dreams engine, and the Dreams engine is a marvel. We could spend a whole podcast talking about that. But Alex Evans basically made the Dreams engine with a lot of help from talented co-workers, of course. And then after working with Media Molecule, he went to work with NVIDIA. And these days, he's working with Midjourney. And as you know, Midjourney is also, they've been talking about this on a few occasions. They're working on a 3D engine of some sorts. It's still very much under wraps, and we haven't heard too much about it. But the idea that talent like that is building world engines basically based on generative AI and who knows what, that's I think that's very exciting.
Yeah, and I want to kind of touch as well a little bit more on Alex Evans and that move from Dreams into NVIDIA, because, as you well know, NVIDIA in like early 2022 came out with a paper called Instant NGP, otherwise known as Instant NERF. And that kind of opened the floodgates for all consumers, or for several consumers with NVIDIA graphics cards, to start using and creating NERFs. And so I want to kind of talk to you a bit about your experience with as that became rapidly feasible.
Yeah, I remember seeing that stuff and immediately thinking of Dreams, actually, because Dreams is in a lot of ways, at least on the visual side, is a little bit similar to what you see in NERF and Gaussian splats. Every surface in Dreams is covered by something called splats or flecks, as they call them in Dreams. So that's basically small textured pieces of surface. And when you get very close to surfaces there, they closely resemble what you see when you get close to a surface in Gaussian splatting on NERFs. But in Dreams, unlike with what we've seen with both Gaussian splats and NERF, you have full control over every surface. So you can manipulate surfaces, you can change their appearance, you can change surface properties, you can light everything with custom lighting, you can animate everything. All of the things that we have yet to see something like that with a tool that employs this technology. So I'm curious. I'll be curious to see, if somebody is going to make a big move in this space of building tools like that. But who knows?
Yeah.
So maybe I can ask this question. So maybe can you walk us through a process how you incorporate those features, for instance, Gaussian splatting, into your artwork? So what is your workflow?
I would say at the moment, Gaussian splatting is a smaller part of what I do with my work. And I wouldn't say it's so much out of a dislike of the technology. I think it's more of a lack of tools, I guess, that lets me manipulate them in an efficient manner. I used to do some experiments of taking my scenes in Dreams, which are quite painterly in nature. And yes, we actually have here on the screen an example of an experiment I did recently using Gaussian splats. in this case, a capture of a Jeep that I did a while ago. And here I'm using Crea AI, which is a real-time AI transformation, a real-time latent consistency model, I think it's called, which allows you to, in close to real time, see an input transformed with generative AI. And as you can see here, I'm able to change the appearance of the scan while still sticking very close to the overall shape, the lighting in the scene, and all of those things. So I think there's a huge untapped potential in using Gaussian splatting because it's so easy to capture reality using this technology. I know, Janusz, you constantly show us all the research papers, and Michael, you as well, on Radiance fields. You show us all these amazing research papers delving into things like how you can apply physical properties to Gaussian splats, how you can use visual segmentation to isolate certain objects in a scan and move them around, and all of these things. What I've yet to see, though, is tools that allow you to go into a Gaussian splat and change, like build things within that capture, and combining that with a capture. And I think once you see those tools, and once we get the training time low enough, I know we've seen examples of very fast training times using very few image inputs. But once we start approaching real-time capture of these scenes, or real-time generation of splats even, then things start to get really interesting. And I'm sure we'll see stuff like that in the near future. But you guys, you know more about that than I do, probably.
Yeah, no, it is coming. I think,
Yeah.
from a lot of the engineers that I've spoken to, it's not really a impossibility so much as a inevitability. And there's certain papers like we were speaking to Rulong last week, and he has a paper called NerfXL, which is just training jointly across GPUs, and it's there are certain ways around it right now as well, where if you really need something instantly, you can have it be created. But the tooling will be interesting to watch as that continues to grow.
I'm sure we're gonna, why wouldn't we see training times reduced to close to zero at some point as hardware capabilities increase and as the technology is optimized, and that idea, I think, is really exciting, because for me as an artist who, I grew up painting and drawing, I grew up getting used to that instant feedback whenever I did something with my tools. There's this I don't know if I can call it like a disconnect between what I do with a lot of digital tools and what I do with traditional tools. And I think that's why I'm steering towards tools like Dreams, where everything is real time. There's no wait time in any part of creating something in Dreams. Even the most complex scenes load in a matter of a second or two, maybe on the PlayStation. And then, going back to Unreal Engine or something where I have to wait for maybe a few minutes just to load the program itself. And then, if I want to import a detailed 3D asset, I have to wait for a few minutes again. And I never know how long I'm going to have to wait. I'm just like, sitting there watching the process bar, which never tells me how long I have left. And that's, to me, it's just stressful. I want to be working in real time, just as when I'm painting. And once we kind of start to see those workflows used with Gaussian splatting technology, I think I'll be very happy.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, speed matters a lot. So this is which kept me also using Google, because it's instantly there. There's search results, and if you use other search machines, it's like you have a certain lag of, let's say, 100 milliseconds or something, and then it becomes annoying if you start Googling fast. But I wanted to ask you something else. How does, for instance, using 3D captures change the artistic process? Makes it something easier for you, or does it just expand the capabilities?
Yeah, I think I think 3D capture is an amazing technology, especially once you start to achieve the level of fidelity you have with Gaussian splats, where it's possible to capture any kind of surface, basically, with more traditional photogrammetry, for instance, capturing something like the fur of a cat, for instance. That would be impossible, you know. The poly count would simply be insanely high and not something you could work with. Whereas with Gaussian splats and NURBS, you are able to capture soft surfaces, which is such a big part of nature. You know, if you look around in your room or at everything surrounding you, there's so many things you couldn't capture with traditional technology. But Gaussians and NURBS capture that so well. And being able to capture that kind of detail and using that in my artistic work, like imagine being able to use Gaussian splats in Unreal Engine 6, for instance, when you're building scenes. Imagine being able to relight everything, change material properties and all of that. And that would be incredibly powerful. And by the way, here in the video, what we're seeing is a scene that I made in Dreams. Everything sculpted here in a matter of like 3 or 4 hours, maybe, for everything you're seeing here. Not using any presets or anything, mind you. Everything is sculpted from scratch in that jungle scene in that amount of time, because the tools are so streamlined. There's no weight on anything. It's very responsive. And all of the scenes that you're seeing here was made in Dreams on my PlayStation, and then filmed with a virtual camera that I moved around just as when you're doing normal scans, but in a virtual place instead, and then converted to I think some of those are probably NURBS because they're from before Gaussian splats, I think. And this is Dreams, by the way. So you see how easily I can manipulate animation. I can move around in my scenes. Again, everything running at something like 60 FPS on a PlayStation 5. Incredibly detailed. A marvel of technology, basically. And it's so interesting because Dreams, the development of Dreams started like I think like 2010 or 11 or something like that, a long time ago. And still the technology that they use in Dreams in so many ways resembles what we're now seeing with Gaussian splats and NURBS. So if you're interested in this field, I would recommend checking out some YouTube videos on the early development of Dreams. There's a lot of interesting context to be had. So if you go to YouTube and search for Alex Evans and Dreams, you will see some very interesting and mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah, that's true. So maybe one question I have is, what does you draw to generative AI? So what particularly interests you in this field, and maybe how do you use the technique to enhance your art? Or maybe we can come later to it, but how does it influence what you are doing, and does it change anything? So how you work?
Yeah, so generative AI has been a large part of my work for the last few years. Basically, when I started hearing about the technology, we had stuff like disco diffusion, and that's a few years ago. I think some of the earliest explorations I did with this technology dates back 5 years or so, when NVIDIA released, they had this tool where you could paint landscapes and see that transformed with Gen AI. And I remember using these tools and thinking like, well, this is definitely the future. Because as an artist of so many years, I know that a very big part of what I do as an artist is very repetitive work, basically. And for a lot of people, of course, that repetitiveness is what pays your paycheck, basically. So it's a difficult minefield to walk through, because it's a balance. You don't want to be able to generate your entire art project in the blink of an eye, basically, because the world is just going to be flooded with content, right? And the same can be said for so many AI projects. If you're looking online these days, there's a huge influx of work that was made with just the click of a button and a text prompt, without a human being shining through the work, so to speak. And I think we've yet to see a really good example of a generative AI workflow that showcases you as the artist, you know, more so than the genericness of Gen AI. And a lot of my work has been trying to find that connection that allows you to have the power of generative AI, because you can create, as you've seen, photoreal videos of imaginary places and people and stories that you make up in a fraction of the time it would take to do in a traditional workflow. And to me, as a storyteller, to me as somebody who grew up with that, wanting to bring the images from my head into the world, there's a lot of opportunity here. But at the same time, I'm also want to make sure that we see the artists behind the work. And we don't at the moment. I think what we're seeing at the moment is the training data steered in the direction of the image you have in your mind. It's not the image in your mind. And I basically want to find a workflow or tools that allow me to bring my vision to life while, you know, it's still my vision, but with the power of being able to generate worlds without a Hollywood budget or, you know, 10 years of my life going into that project. So yeah, that's again a huge field, and we could speak about this for hours. And as I mentioned before, it's been a controversial topic for me to speak about, because I come from the background of doing artwork for so many years, and to a lot of people, it's like a betrayal of my art colleagues and friends that I dare to speak about these workflows. But you know, in my mind, I don't see generative AI going away at any point. It's the Pandora's box is open now. It's so powerful for a lot of obvious reasons. And knowing that, I would much rather help steer the technology in a direction where we as creatives, we as artists, are the ones steering the technology. We'll be the ones telling the stories, bringing our visions to life. And I'll continue to work towards that. I'm not interested in artists losing their work. I know you know, jobs are going to change for sure. They have always changed when new technology arrived, and it's going to be the same with generative AI. People are going to have to learn new things. They have to think out of the box, be creative as they always have, you know. But yes, certainly a difficult topic, I would say. But what do you guys think about generative AI? Michael, what do you think about this technology? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you?
Yeah. So my opinion on the generative side is that I think it's going to continue to get just, you know, significantly stronger and stronger. I constantly reference this paper from Ben Mildenhall and the team at Google called Reconfusion, where essentially, you know, it's taking generative AI and painting quite a lot of the scene, and specific, you know, using with Radiance fields, and they're able to, you know, create these still, you know, plausible worlds from down to just as few as 3 images. And you know, Reconfusion now is coming up on close to a year, I would say, since it was like publicly published. And so I am
a long time, right, in this world. A year.
Yes,
such a long time.
Yes, so I'm very curious to see, you know, how they will continue to impact, you know, specifically in the world of Radiance field, as well as just like moving into 3D and general day-to-day art. You know, I see a lot of the work that Luma AI is putting out as well with the Dream Machine and and I think it's just like very impressive to see, you know, the consistency in between some of these shots where you're able to take the footage and, you know, put that into just a straight reconstruction pipeline, and it can reconstruct too, kind of like you were showing with Dreams.
Yeah, there's some pretty mind-blowing examples of what you can do with just one input image, right? Where you almost feel like if you just continued the AI video for a bit longer, you could basically make an entire Gaussian scan from just one video generated from one image, you know.
Yes, and I do think that will happen sooner than later as well. I think it's likely that will be the case.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I basically think everything is possible in this. It's very difficult when I always have a problem with people saying like, well, you saw that with generative images of hands, right? Where people were like, oh, we don't need to worry because the machines can't do hands, right? And then a month later, they do perfect hands. I know they still struggle sometimes, but it's very close to perfect most of the time. And people are like, well, with video, the people still, they can't walk straight, And then a month later, we see Kling or Runway with still some wonkiness, of course, but a lot of examples where it's almost indistinguishable from a real video. And we're going to continue to see those strides being made here. We're going to continue to see the improvement. And I've said this many times, but I believe that in just a few years from now, these models are going to be a commodity. You're going to have a lot of different AI models that allow you to all create very realistic content. And in that world, what's interesting to me now is how you control the output of these models. How do you make sure that what you're making is the vision in your head and not just the generic baseline of the training data, basically. And that's why I'm continuing to pursue these experiments of combining traditional art skills with Gen AI, because I think that's how you're going to imbue these projects with your personality, basically.
To me, it feels like text to image is almost solved. If you look at Flux, it looks really incredible. It's like 1 year of progress, and it completely changed the quality how it looks like. Also, the text to video or image to video models, they are very good. They provide really great renderings, and it feels like you don't need Radiance fields anymore, because everything you want to design, you can do it just by video. But on the other end, it's very it pretty much matters what you input into the video. So when I look at the images which are generated by different models by prompting, it feels very boring and kind of soulless, and there's not much which makes me excited, because you mostly see some sexy girls and people are sharing this, but it's very, very common art. You don't see many differences between the different images that are generated. So it makes a lot of difference what you input, and this holds also true for video models, I think. And given this, so I would be interested, what is your current workflow which is closest to what you would consider as control about these models?
Yeah, I would say what I've learned over the years of doing these experiments is that, in my mind, the most interesting Gen AI assisted workflows are workflows where you, as the creative, you do most of the work to a certain level of detail, and then you use generative AI as a sort of render layer on top of your work. So what I've been experimenting with is doing pretty detailed scenes and dreams, like you saw in some of the examples, the scans you saw, like the jungle scene, for instance. That's pretty detailed. If you squint your eyes and look at it, it looks like a real jungle, basically. And then what generative AI basically does is open your eyes again, instead of you squinting and looking at the image. Now generative AI opens your image and eyes, and now the scene is entirely realistic. Now it's the jungle with all the small details and everything. The problem with that workflow at the moment, though, is that you don't have temporal coherence, or spatial coherence. So once you start moving around in the scene, everything basically changes on each frame. But again, I'm sure some genius out there is going to solve that and allow you to lock down everything in a scene. Now, take one scene of your project, do the AI rendering layer, and then you'll be able to go in and lock down elements you like or change things you don't like. And now you have a game engine, right, where you can create entire worlds like this. And if it's, if it's pure diffusion, AI diffusion, or if there's some sort of Gaussian splatting conversion or something happening, I don't know what it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be polygons. I think it's going to be something else. Like, And I honestly, I think that's very exciting. I think there's so much opportunity here to do new things and tell new stories. And I'm here for it.
Yeah, awesome. So what would be the closest workflow for you where you consider, okay, this is where you have the most control over what you are doing? And also when you input it into the video models, sometimes you post videos where you see like your art and it moves. I mean, you can't change, like, for instance, like after 2 seconds or something, the color of a figure of a head or whatever. So there is no control essentially yet. But
Yeah.
what is the closest workflow to you? What you would consider to have the most control over?
Yeah. Well, I would say in terms of control, the best workflow still that I've experienced is building things in Dreams, just because it's such an efficient workflow. I can build things there, like again the jungle. I think that was like 4 hours of work from scratch. I didn't use any pre-made rocks or plants or anything, and everything was hand sculpted and painted in that amount of time. So in terms of control, I would say that, because at any point, again, I can go into any object in the scene. I can change the color of the rocks, the textures across the jungle floor, the plants. I can even like copy mountains and move them around without any lag at all. And when you combine that with these latent consistency models, those mountains no longer look like, you know, a painting or a piece of concept art. Now they look entirely realistic, but I'm able to move them around in real time, and that feeling is entirely different than prompting Midjourney, for instance. Which, as you say, Janusz, I feel exactly the same when I see these purely text-based AI works. I kind of become numb to them. You know, I don't find them interesting. I don't see any soul in them, as you say. And I think that's actually a very, very good way of putting it. There's no soul in it. You know, it's just generic, and that's very boring. And I still feel like that with most of the AI work I see out there, including my own, actually. I don't think what I'm showcasing is the perfect example of these workflows yet.
Mm-hmm.
But at least what I'm advocating for is workflows that allow the artist to put themselves into the work, which I think is going to continue to be more important as we move forward. At least I hope so. You know, you might also say that at some point you can probably ask ChatGPT 5 to put some soul in it, and it's just gonna generate a human being or something in the cloud and have that soul poured into the work. I don't know. But until that happens, we might as well assume it's not going to happen and continue to pursue the idea of allowing more of you and everybody who's interested in creating, allowing more of them to go into the artwork, exactly like you do with traditional artwork. I think that's important.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, you know, as these technologies continue to evolve and grow stronger, and you know, hopefully begin to intersect with one another, I am like curious about your thoughts with where like nerfs and like radiance fields might intersect with, and you know, if it perhaps means like a departure from 2D as like a monopoly on imaging, the way that people interact with.
Yeah, I think where we're going with a lot of this technology, I don't think it's gonna make a lot of sense to talk about 2D or 3D or video or images. I think everything is gonna merge into this a new medium, basically, where you can take any kind of input and transform that or move around in it. So you'll be able to take a photo you took on a vacation years ago, and you'll take that photo and you'll be able to move into that photo and you know, turn the camera around and see everything from various angles. And then if you have more photos from that vacation, the system is gonna use that to influence what you're seeing. So instead of everything being hallucinated into view, it's gonna use reference images on the internet, data that it gathers from all sorts of different places to make sure that what you're seeing in that photo is actually resembling the data it has on the real place. Maybe I think we're going to see those kind of technologies. I remember we've actually seen examples of some of this. I don't remember if it was Microsoft or something who had this project that would use photographs of like landmarks and cities and stuff to create these kind of point clouds you could move around in, using data out there. So a lot of places are so over photographed these days that you can generate point clouds from that data. And yeah, I think everything is basically going to merge. So video, images, 3D, it's going to be the same thing. You can use everything as everything basically, which is a strange place to be.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Go ahead, Mike.
It's very exciting. And at the core of everything, I'm just very positive about these developments, even though it's so easy to, I think it's so very easy to look at these things and feel like, oh, this is the end of the need for human creatives, human artists. But again, if you look at what people are creating without being an artist or without the sensibility of somebody who's worked with images for many years and created them using traditional means, to me, there's still a big difference in what people create. You can clearly see, I think, when people have that sensibility and that background, and they're just doing higher quality work, exactly like if you put somebody in front of Photoshop who's never used it before. I feel like it's the same with Gen AI. So that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, should you add a question?
Yeah, actually, I have a lot of questions. So for me, I mean, if you get like new tools which you're using and which generate more, do you feel something if you use less traditional 3D artists skills like modeling, for instance, or sculpting, and you generate more, that there's a loss of skills over time? Because sometimes what I'm thinking, if you use LLMs for software engineering and you kind of can get into a lazy mode where you just start prompting stuff, right? And then if you do it all over the time, every day, maybe there's also some loss of professional skills like writing the scripts yourself. How do you think about this in the artistic field? Is it also the case or not yet?
Yeah, and that's a very relevant question, and I wouldn't say I don't have a good answer as to how we can avoid that, because I have kids here in the house. I have 3 kids, and my daughter, who's 10, she's very creative and she loves to paint and draw and build things, and I look at her and the work that she's doing, and sometimes I'm like, why do I continue to encourage her to keep drawing and keep building stuff when she could basically just go on her mobile phone and generate an image in some of these systems that are now so readily available? And luckily I always come back to the conclusion that I think it's a good thing that she continues to nourish her creativity and those skills. And I would encourage everybody, even grown-ups who use these tools, to go back to the basics, like learn the artistic basics, because that's gonna improve your generative AI work as well. You can't rely on the computer to do anything or everything for you. I think art basics are going to be even more important. And the good thing is you're going to have more time to actually study those things and train those things, because now in the very near future you won't have to spend as much time learning how to do proper UV unwrapping, for instance, stuff like that in the future, where you can move through an image and change everything. You won't have to worry about UV unwrapping. You won't have to worry about PBR textures, fireflies in your renderings, and all of those things that I had to deal with. Honestly, I won't mourn the loss of those things. To me, polygons is a terrible thing, a terrible concept, forcing artists to pull small points around on gray boxes. Why do we have to do this in this day and age, right? So many years after the birth of this technology, why is that still what we're doing in a lot of cases? And yeah, there's just a lot of things that I think could be improved in those workflows. And I've been doing a lot of 3D art using more traditional means. I've been using 3D for many years now, and I've worked in Unreal Engine 5 worked on game projects, used ZBrush and all of the more traditional 3D tools for many years. Even when I did VR sculpting, I still had to take those models that I enjoyed sculpting like this. I still had to take those models into a traditional workflow of doing, a low poly version, baking normal maps. And when I think back on how much time I spent doing those very repetitive, to me, kind of meaningless tasks that I might as well put a computer to do, that's just a very, very big part of the work that I did. And even to this day, 3D artists spend so much time doing those things that, once you have your form, once you know the colors of everything, once you've done the texture painting, there's so much upkeep around that you spend so much time doing. And again, I understand why people want to spend a lot of time working on those things, because often that's what pays your salary, but when you try to look at it from a high vantage point, a lot of those things could be improved, I think, and you could be doing more in less time.
So surprisingly, when I share all this news around Gaussian splitting, the question I get most often is, can it be meshed? So people are so used to meshes and don't have a sense, maybe not yet, how to use different technologies and what could be enabled by this. And also, I mean, it's natural because there are no tools available yet, so people are used to what they are doing on a daily basis. So there's a lot of potential to explain what's possible, but still the tooling is missing. So I think there's like a huge gap where somebody could step in and just provide some nice tools which can be used to enable just new creative ways of working.
Yeah, and I would say that's exactly the main reason why I'm not using Gaussian splats and nerfs these days so much. It's just the lack of proper ways to work with the technology, because I think it's amazing. I think you can do so detailed scans of the world, and you can imagine having large databases of scans that people made, and I think there's definitely a market gap there that I hope somebody's going to fill. And I'm I'd be curious to see, like, if companies like Epic, for instance, with Unreal, if they're considering these kinds of technologies in something like Unreal Engine 6, because if you look at what you do now these days, you go to Megascan libraries and you use these very high polygon models and everything, and they still look they look worse than a Gaussian splatting capture you could go out and do in a matter of a minute of video filming with a mobile phone, which would be your own scans and not just something everybody's using. So if you have an eye for those things, you start recognizing the same rocks in different games and stuff. And to me, it would be much cooler if it would just be easy enough to make those assets that people could do them themselves and create unique experiences. But again, a market gap. So hopefully somebody's watching and thinking, hey, we're going to do that.
You're giving out business ideas for free here.
The funny thing, right? All I want is basically just to create with these tools. I don't even want to. I don't want to start my own company doing those things. I much rather just want to sculpt and build and have fun. But
on the production side as well too, there's starting to be a few more developments of companies starting to embrace the technology, where I just saw earlier this week Sony in Japan just announced their own Nerf format and starting to use it for virtual production. And
really? I didn't even know that. That's exciting.
Yeah, it's just a video I kind of stumbled upon in Japanese, but I haven't posted about it just yet, so I will make that post right after this.
Yeah,
but
I'm looking forward to seeing that. I'm actually still a little bit. I still have so many mixed feelings about Sony and Dreams and Media Molecule, because I as part of probably some of the people who loved Dreams the most and spent most time creating with the tools there. It's just so strange to me that Dreams is now like a finished product, that it isn't taken further. To me, it's like still the perfect example of a creative sandbox that, if combined with Gen AI and Gaussian splats and all of these very exciting technical developments, could become like a world engine, basically, that would allow people to have very high control over these new systems. But I know for a fact, though, that Dreams has made big ripples in the industry, and the right people have definitely noticed Dreams and are aware of what you can do there and how it works. And I've spoken to a lot of people in various companies around the world, which are very big companies, and they're all very impressed with Dreams and very interested in that more playful approach to creating games and worlds. So yeah, so hopefully we'll see some variation or some inspired product at some time or at some point, which Dreams like inspired.
And
some
yeah.
updates there.
Yeah, I don't know.
Out of curiosity too, so if you have the ability to like create an entire world, for a lot of people getting started too, could also feel in some ways overwhelming about the infinite possibilities. I mean, do you have any recommendations then of just kind of like approaching that head on, just to kind of get started? And
I would say that's a common problem, I think, with everybody starting out in the field. For some reason, people always start wanting to create like the next World of Warcraft or something. I've seen lots of examples of that in Dreams, where people would download Dreams on their PlayStation and think, okay, now I have Dreams, so now I can create like some crazy MMO or something, and it's the same thing in art. Basically, people often start out with way too high ambitions, and then they hit that wall of not being able to reach that goal. So as with any technology or any workflow, I would say focus on the small things first, like start out small, and then you can start expanding the scope of what you build. So, start creating a small object and taking that as far as you can, and then you can continue to move on. I think there's a good reason why the donut tutorials in the Blender community are so popular, right? Because it's a freaking donut, Everybody knows what that looks like, and it's relatively simple to sculpt. And even though that's so simple, in Blender, it takes like, I don't know, like 20 chapters of how to create a donut.
I did it myself as well, and it didn't look as good as in the tutorial.
No, that's very discouraging. And also, the fact that it's such a technical process to make something as simple as a donut, that you have a very clear image of a donut in your head, but still the process of getting that image out into the world is just so overly technical. And again, in Dreams, for fun, I made a donut I think it took me 1 minute to make something that looked pretty good, a donut with glazing and everything in 1 minute. Mm-hmm. Using just my two hands and no keyboard or shortcuts or anything, just the move controllers. So a lot of room for improvement in our 3D workflows. And if that involves generative AI, I would say if I had gotten like a Dreams version 2, I'm not even sure I would have needed generative AI, because it's so fast to work with and it's entirely my own, But if the alternative is to go back to Unreal Engine and traditional 3D workflows, I would much rather have fun with generative AI, because there's just so many things about the traditional workflows that I think are just too slow. You spend so much time waiting on things you shouldn't be waiting on. So yeah, huge room for improvement there for sure.
For sure, just the beginning. So I wonder if you're using this tech, is it sometimes that you get surprised but by the outcome? So you have something in your mind and you're working towards an artistic goal and want to achieve something, but then you use something like Dream Machine or other image to video models, and then you get something out of it, and it's something you didn't expect.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty much happening all the time, which is sometimes it's fun, but most of the time it's very frustrating, I think, because it always produces something, or not always, but it very often produces things that look really good, but it's never like what I imagined. And as a creative artist who's used to drawing with a pencil and having full control over what I'm drawing, it might not always look amazing what I do with these tools, but at least it's my own will being translated onto the paper in a way. Where with generative AI, everything is still just a big slot machine. And for your usual sci-fi trailers or images of picture perfect people, then it's fine, I guess. But as soon as you start to ask for more control, it's a big problem. And a really good case of this, actually, and a test that I would recommend everybody in this space, everybody working with generative AI. This is a test for you. So if you look out your window or at something in your house, try and recreate that scene with generative AI workflows. Like, try and prompt your room into existence using these tools. I tried the same thing with my kitchen. So I took a photo out in the kitchen, and then I tried to prompt something that looked like that kitchen, describing everything in detail. And of course, the image would look entirely different. And the funny thing about that is that traditional artists for centuries now have, they've looked at the world and they've been able to take everything from there and put it onto the canvas and make it look amazing, and make it look like what they're seeing. Now with generative AI, you're not able to do the same thing at the moment. And of course, that is a huge problem with this technology, because very often you want to be able to recreate things you're seeing in the world, right? You're not going to want to create something that's entirely different, a kitchen, some perfect kitchen from a lifestyle magazine or something, That's really not interesting, I think. So I think the key ingredient here is mixing things that you yourself sculpt and paint or 3D scan, and then bring into these generative workflows. So you could imagine like scanning a person and being able to bring them into the virtual production or the AI assisted workflow, or scanning a certain room in your house and using that in a horror film that you create using generative AI. So I think the key thing here is combining the different technologies and not relying entirely on some generic AI image, because that's just going to be boring so quickly. So
you can do you can do the lazy version. Just take an image of your kitchen, put it into an LLM like ChatGPT.
Yeah, sure.
Let it describe, and then put it back into a text to image.
Yeah, you're not the first person to suggest that. When I did my experiment, I shared some of the results of that, and people were like, "Why don't you just take a photo and use that as image to image?" I don't think they really got the point of the exercise.
Yeah.
But if you're an artist, if you're traditionally schooled, everybody has done these live studies of scenes and have been able to recreate reality very closely. And again, I would love to see somebody do this and say that what Martin is saying isn't true. Of course I can recreate my desk with the computer and all the things lying there and the lighting and everything. But I would bet on that not being possible in any way. You can create something that's you could create a computer desk with a screen and a mouse and everything, but it wouldn't be your reality. It would just be the AI's version of it. And I haven't seen anybody solve that problem yet. I would say, though, that the closest I've gotten to feeling like I have control over generative AI is still my experiments of combining dreams scenes. So I made some scene in dreams, and I took that through Magnific AI, which is this AI image enhancer or upscaler. Upscaling is not a good definition because it changes the image. It doesn't just upscale it. It still hallucinates. But I was able to take those dream scenes and take them into Magnific, and then get an image out which looked entirely realistic, but still looked like my dreams work. And I notice here that I'm talking a lot about photoreal. I haven't even touched upon stylized work using generative AI. And the reason why I haven't touched upon stylized work is because, to me, stylization is such a personal artistic thing. And generative AI you can create stylized work using these tools, but to me it feels like it's just, I don't know. I don't think it's an interesting use of the technology, because it's not your style. It doesn't say anything about your own artistic journey. It's just some mashup of hundreds of different or millions of styles, Whereas photoreal is something different because it's just photoreal, So
yeah, you see sometimes like take this image and make it into Picasso style or some Van Gogh style or something like this. So
yeah, or
it
even
looks
living artists, And this to me is a bad use of AI, when you recreate the style of some artist out there who's actually making a living out of having achieved that style over many years of study. I would never do that. I wouldn't. And I don't think anybody should. I would love if those systems didn't allow for that to happen. If you could only achieve a certain level of likeness before the systems would just refuse to go further. I don't like that use of generative AI at all. Whereas for photorealism, it's something different, because there's so much, we're surrounded by photoreal objects all the time. So to me, it's not a personal artistic thing the same way that stylization is.
Yeah. So another question I got. I mean, we are already on 1 hour mark, so maybe like two more minutes. I have so many questions for you. Could talk with you the whole night.
Yeah, I don't have a tight schedule anyway. So
then we can go on. So maybe you touch upon the controversial part of using this techniques to create art. Maybe you can expand there, because there are sometimes, if you read through the comments, there's sometimes like hate or maybe also fear about this technique. What's going to change, and how do you cope with this? Because I think sometimes you might be the target for it. And what do you think why people are so scared of it? Not all, but some.
Yeah, that is a good question, and it's certainly something that's that we're going to continue to see discussions around this, and we're also I'm sure we're going to see some legal proceedings in some of the cases, because, as you know, there's at the moment there's some legal cases against, I think it's against Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, right? I know some artists are suing those companies for the use of their data. And that is a very relevant discussion, I think. The indiscriminate scraping of data is wrong on many levels. And whether or not it's going to be deemed illegal, that's another case. We'll see. It's not that difficult to imagine, I think. And at some point, I'm sure we're gonna have some clearance on that issue. But the thing I also mentioned before is that I don't see generative AI going away, no matter what happens with these proceedings. Because if it's, let's say it's deemed illegal for Midjourney to use this data, somebody else is going to come along with a model that's trained entirely on synthetic data, or that's trained entirely on data they own, like Adobe is doing with Firefly, for instance, which is, I know there's been some controversies around that as well, where there was examples of some of their stock contributors having uploaded Midjourney images, but still it's a small fraction of the training data for that system, and it's very close to a system that I'm sure is something that's going to persist. I don't think that's going to go away, and we're going to see other players as well with huge data sets, like Hollywood companies, film companies, companies who own a lot of image data. They're going to be able to train their own systems as well. And again, I think with that in mind, some of the open source models are interesting, I think, because they are for everybody to use freely, as opposed to some of those big corps who owns training data and owns the systems. So yeah, it's a difficult decision or discussion. I like open source for that. It's for everybody. It's like some powerful tools that are free to use for anybody, regardless of where they live in the world and what kind of financial situation they're in, and all of those things. I think that's a good thing. But again, we could spend hours talking about this. There's no easy answer here. I think on a personal note, I would say I like the idea of this kind of visual inheritance of all humanity in a way. I think it's a powerful concept, the idea that future generations are going to be able to create worlds and tell stories in ways we can't even imagine today, building on the work of all of us, But we should have been asked, I would say. If we wanted to contribute, I would have said yes for sure. I think it's a strong concept, but I'm also very aware that it's not a black and white discussion. And as you say, I've had very strong reactions against it, and usually I take it with a grain of salt, or that's even a wrong way of saying it, because it means something to me. But I don't think our strong reactions is going to change the fact that these systems are here now. And as I said before, I would rather explore how you can use your artistic skills in the future as well to continue to create more interesting stories, more interesting artwork, things that move us all,
Yeah, and I think that sometimes a helpful exercise, at least for me, is to take a look at industries that perhaps are a bit further advanced in terms of adoption of AI systems. And I think that the one that I default most often to is actually in chess, where you have engines like Stockfish and other neural nets that can just objectively tell people what the best move is in any given scenario. And there was actually a interview with Magnus Carlsen, who is the I guess you could say like undisputed #1 player in chess for quite a while now. And the interviewer had asked him, what has the inclusion of AI in chess done to what you see in the competitive landscape and to the overall landscape of chess players? And his response was that it has made a lot of people get significantly stronger much faster than they otherwise would have been able to. And for him too, he's also been able to derive value out of it for his own individual games. And I think that, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, I think that some of these systems will allow people to take on more and more complicated endeavors, and hopefully we'll be able to, as the end consumer, be the beneficiary of that, where we have all these people who are really qualified and really talented, who have these additional levers that they can pull on to actually create better, or more. I don't want to say better, but a wider variety of.
I agree entirely. I think an example that I often think of is some of the tests I've done of painting characters in Photoshop and then using systems like Crea AI, for instance, to transform those paintings into photoreal human images that look like the sketch I made. They have the same features, the same proportions, the same lighting, basically all of my artistic intent in creating that person, and hold that up against how you would do that in a traditional 3D workflow. A lot of people use systems like MetaHumans, and then they tweak parameters and sliders for hours on end. They spend a lot of time painting 3D textures and everything. While to me, the interesting creative part of the process happens when you do the sketch, when you lay out the foundations of that person, define the features through brush strokes and everything. And the crazy thing here was that I was able to take those sketches, transform them into photoreal humans that looked like my intent, and then upload those to something like Kling or Runway or Luma, and then see that person move. Entirely believable, much more realistic than 99% of all the 3D work you see out there of human beings. Because a human being is such a complex thing. And if you want to recreate that in 3D, it's just a monumental task. And we've only seen very few examples of that done really well. You've seen the examples of the Star Wars movies where they recreated some characters in 3D, and it still looks uncanny, you know. And I've seen examples of these AI-based workflows where we see human beings that look more believable than those huge Hollywood productions, you know. And there's just so much obvious value in a storytelling context in being able to create these things like that. And I think it's exciting, I think.
It's also some form of prototyping, isn't it? I mean, if you can just generate a skeleton, it gives you a rough idea how it might look like, and also speeds up some processes, so you're more free to work on the story itself, maybe.
Yeah, sure. And I think that our entire workflows are going to change because I've also spoken about this before, but in a normal production, everything is so tied up on resources and time and money, which means that you sometimes go down routes that you, even though you know it's not the best route, you kind of become married to the process in a way because it's so time consuming and expensive to create these things. So even though you realize halfway through a project that this is not what you wanted the project to be, this is not what you imagined, you're gonna have to continue moving on because it would be too costly to go back and change things that you decided early on in the process. And I think we're going to see more fluent shifts between different stages of a project. So you're going to be able to go back and change things much easier and without the huge monetary cost, which eventually is going to mean that you can get inspired by the process of creating things and use the process to inspire change in the whole project. Instead of having to pre-plan everything, you can still have like a piece of clay, where you can change the shape of everything. Projects are going to be the same. You're going to be able to change the whole shape of a project at any point in the process, which I think is going to eventually mean that we'll see more quality projects made. Of course, a lot of crap as well. People just prompting Netflix for the next horror movie or something and then getting some generic AI output. I think that's going to happen too. You're going to see entire movies generated in real time like that. But they're probably, hopefully, going to be crappy movies compared to movies created by human beings. But
yeah, it's very interesting. We could keep going forever because it's so interesting.
Yeah, we probably have to wrap it up. But as always, if I would say if anybody has any questions about these workflows and everything, you can always reach out on social media. And I'm also open to discussions about people who don't agree with these things. I think it's important to discuss with everybody, even people who disagree with you. And I'm always open to that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you, Martin, for joining us on today's talk. And really quick, just before we wrap up, next week we will also be back yet again for the next episode. We will be having Yoshiharu Sato from Godzilla Pro on the stream with us, which is going to be a really, really fun chat. He's actually shown us a couple of the previews of what he has coming up, and they are going to, in my mind, really transform the way that industries and more commercial use cases of Radiance fields. So that one should be a really fun and cool chat. So I definitely recommend tuning in next week as well.
Cool. Yeah, and thank you so much, both of you, for hosting this talk and for speaking, as always, advocating this technology and speaking about it online. I think I'm personally reading a lot of the research papers you share, Janusz, and Michael. I'm going to Radiance fields when I need to read up on the latest developments. So continue to speak about this technology. I think there's exciting things to come for sure, and I'm looking forward to following along, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you being with us. It was really a pleasure to talk with you about this tech. It's always fun to talk with you and see what might be the future, right? The future workflow of artists. So you give us a glimpse into it. And
we should speak again in a year or so and see if everything's changed, if people still talk about Gaussian splats, if it's embedded in our creative tools, or that would be
would be interesting to just see what changed since the last time.
Yeah, It's
probably
gonna
a
be
whole lot.
interesting. Cool.
All right, but I hope to see you both soon again, and if not anywhere else, then at least online on like social media.
For sure,
Definitely.
Martin. Thank you very
All
much.
right, bye everyone.
Hey.
Bye.
All right.